Sell in May and go away. For the last 5 years or so, that hasn't really mattered. In fact, you would have lost money had you sold at the beginning of May and gone away from markets. This year would have been a really good idea to have done so, because basically all of the gains that the JSE made between January and April this year were wiped out during the month of May. And it's not hard to see why. We've seen executives fall on their swords. We've seen CEOs suspended, fired and retired. And we've seen share prices fall off a cliff, most notably share prices like Massmart and Sasol. But there have been a whole bunch of others. This is our regular catch-up on what has been going on markets over the last month. And there's a huge amount to talk about. We're in the Vestact offices in Rosebank, Johannesburg. The old Rosebank fire station is just below us, and Paul Theron, the managing director of Vestact, hosting us today, which is very nice of him in this brand new office. I smell fresh paint. You know, they say the Queen of England thinks that the whole of Britain smells of fresh paint because wherever she goes, the place, and it does. Kabelo, I mean, it does. Kabelo Tshola is with FNB Wealth Investments. You're jealous, I think, of the space.
No, fantastic building here.
Hey, isn't it nice? Hey, isn't it? He's so well mannered. And behind Kabelo and Paul, you see lots of graphs, and they are plant graphs. And we'll get to that in a minute, because one represents Taste Holdings on the JSE, and it goes up, 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 and then falls down into the corner. We've got a special plant representing Tesla, and Amazon as well gets a look in, but we'll get to those in just a bit. But a torrid month, Paul. I mean, sell in May and go away. You're not a seller of anything. You tend to like to hold for the long term, but you'd be more than 10% better off had you sold in May and gone away.
Yeah, it's very depressing locally. It's very hard to find any kind of optimism to hang on to, because one after the other, all of our market-leading big-cap stocks have taken a solid punch to the face over the last 3 years or so. So the one or two that hadn't yet fallen on their ears have proceeded to do so. You mentioned Massmart, Sasol, of course, took a bit of a dive, and that's on top of all of the disasters we've had before. So I just feel as though there's a general depressed sort of compression of price-to-earnings ratios going on, where people are just not very optimistic about making money in the asset class. As we always say, that's probably when you should buy, but it doesn't feel that way.
No, and that's usually the time you should buy. Kabelo, let's look at some specifics. Massmart came out with a profit warning. Their profits are going to halve. Their chief executive had already announced that he was going at the end of the year, Guy Hayward, 2 or 3 weeks before that. Now they're bringing in an American from Walmart, and probably the most telling statistic we should look at from a Massmart perspective is the fact that Walmart, which paid an absolute fortune, like going into wine farming, how do you make a small fortune out of Massmart? Buy at a high price. And I mean, even Walmart's 51% stake is worth just 20% of what they paid for it 8 years ago. This has been value destruction on an epic scale.
Indeed. I mean, so currently valued at about 7.9 billion. It's been a torrid time for Walmart. I don't think they expected to find this type of value destruction. Many factors played out. One, the rand weakened from the 6 rand that they were paying at the time to about 14.80 where we're at. Two, it's also been very difficult to get a grip on the economy and to get it going. In fact, you know, GDP numbers would suggest that we've struggled as a country post-2008 depression. So it's really been pure value destruction, and I think rightly Mr. Hayward needed to maybe review his options.
And he did, and he's decided to take the leap. Walmart bringing in their own guy. It's damning, I suppose, on the Massmart structure. Traditionally, I mean, Mark Lamberti started Massmart. He then put Grant Patterson, his protege, in there. Guy Hayward was Grant Patterson's 2IC, the finance director. And now Walmart are going, you guys don't know what you're doing. We're sending in a big gun who's worked in Mexico and other places to fix it.
Well, let's see what happens, you know. Typically when foreigners come here, they don't do very well. If I was running Massmart, oddly I haven't
You'd also be fired.
I haven't had the call. I would change the brand of everything to Walmart, because it strikes me that that's a real global powerhouse. It has a certain cachet. But then again, they have argued over time that Game is a wonderful brand and that Macro
but Game
is
the
well
problem.
known.
Game is the problem in the stable, isn't it?
We could have people of Massmart with locals being photographed, you know, from the East Rand with their pants down. That would be perfect. We could contribute to the global genre of people of Walmart. And I suspect people would associate that brand with discount numbers. Yeah. But Look, I think the context is difficult. Until such time as we have some sustained economic growth in this country, it's very hard to make money as a retailer.
I mean, if you go into the game store down here, it's neither fish nor fowl. It just looks like a more compact macro.
Indeed.
It doesn't have its own identity. I mean, is it worth even keeping on, Gavin?
Look, I just to add on to Paul, I think one could have looked for potential local management to try and run that. It's a difficult market. Very few have succeeded. One in mind is obviously Whitey Basson. But
he's retired. He's over
retired.
70.
Yes,
you can't make
indeed.
him do it again. No.
But I think the dynamics locally speak to someone who, or beckon to bring someone in who's aware of the African sort of dynamic and has aspirations to move, as Massmart, Walmart, I beg your pardon, has rightly said, to move out further into the continent.
I mean, and Paul mentioned foreign chief executives don't always make a success of things. Just down the hill from this office is the old Sasol building that I see is being repopulated now with funky startups. But it was David Constable, the Canadian, was he Canadian or American? The North American chief executive of Sasol, who got them into a project at Lake Charles in Louisiana, which just over the last quarter did another 15 billion rands worth of cost overruns. 6 weeks after they said, okay, we know what it's all going to cost and here's the final number. I mean, it's just, we are not running businesses in South Africa properly.
No, look, I think there's a lot to be read into it. I'd be worried. I think a lot of shareholders were worried and they spoke with their shares. The stock dropped 15% in one day, another 4-5%. And I think a lot of things are at play here. There's obviously the fear of, like you were mentioning, the fear of us not being able to execute properly on the offshore platform. 2, the dividend. Is this at risk? No one knows for sure. But speaking or listening to management speak, they're of the opinion that this is the final straw.
That's what they told us 2 months ago. What is final? How much is final? And our consultants told us this was the final amount. Our own people told us this was the final amount. Oops, we've gone over by another $1 billion. It's a big oops. It raises the question, Paul Theron, and I want to pick up on this in the second part, and it's an uncomfortable discussion, but it's an important one. Where have the investment analysts been in properly analysing these companies and trying to understand prospects for these companies that's allowed share prices to be elevated to the point that they have been? And have we been overpaying management teams for mismanaging assets in South Africa? We'll pick up on that point in just a moment here on Taking Stock. We are talking about a disastrous month of May for investors, and all of you are affected, whether you're a civil servant who has got shares in companies courtesy of the Government Employees Pension Fund, or whether you've got a retirement annuity, whatever it is, if you're employed with any kind of pension assets, this kind of conversation matters to you because you're invested, whether you know it or not. More in a moment.